Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour, the podcast where we discuss everything SEO and digital marketing. This week is a news recap. I'm going to talk about everything that happened in May of 2026, since it's June of 2026. It's hard to believe it's June already, right? My name is Jack Chambers Ward and I am your host as always. And like I said, I'm going to go through all of the important SEO news from the month of May 2026. We're going to get into some Google I/O stuff. We're going to talk about some AI search stuff, of course. We're going to get into some local search stuff as well. And of course, another core update. There's a few things to talk about, like I said, but before I get to all of that, please do like and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow on Spotify, and follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts as well. Wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching, I hugely appreciate any and everybody who leaves a comment, who likes, all that good stuff. I really appreciate you guys letting me knowing what you're enjoying about the show and what you want to see from episodes in the future as well. Without any further ado, I believe it's 6 different stories. Sorry, I've got my screen to the left here. Got 6 different stories to talk about this week, and there are some dense ones in there, some dense pieces of information and articles, mostly Google focused, I must admit, but they had Google I/O, and they're also the biggest search company in the world, so it's kind of hard to avoid, right? Let's get into early in May. This is back on the 6th of May, talking about 5 new ways to explore the web with generative AI in search. So this is basically talking about some new updates that have arrived in AI mode and AI overviews. If we scroll down here, if you're watching on YouTube, you can follow along and read the articles along with me. And of course, I'll put links for everything in the show notes if you do want to go and read everything in a bit more detail. This is what Google describes as exploring new angles. So this is a way in which the AI responses link to different things. So link to separate articles. They give those external links. You can then see the ways that they all kind of connect together. So this is in-depth articles and links to information from there. So you can see here the kind of preview window, but then a lot more detail and a few more links. This little section here, so like the little breakout section, the suggestions, are trying to encourage you to click through. At least that's what Google's claiming. And this is really an element of Google trying to reassure us that we're going to get clicks from these AI responses, right? From AI overviews and AI mode. I have yet to see, there's not any data from any of this sort of stuff. There's no confirmation of improving any click-through rate or anything like that. And this is all still very new. Even if it wasn't as new, I don't think Google will be giving us that information. So bear with us while we kind of try to understand what the click-through rate is for this kind of stuff. The second one, easily access your news subscriptions. So this is an interesting one, and something I won't be covering in this one because that actually happened in June, is Google talking about preferred sources. They really seem to be emphasizing trusted sources. There's that keyword of trust again, as of course so key to EEAT. It's really a way in which you can select your news sources and basically ensure that you're getting the kind of news you want in your feed. And I say feed because it feels like Google Discover. Preferred sources is a thing that came from Google Discover and is now being brought into the wider search space, which I think is something very interesting. But this is actually something that publishers can link to, and subscribers can then subscribe to specific things using this form. And unsurprisingly, there was a little test here. In early testing, we saw that people were significantly more likely to click links that were labeled as their subscriptions. So you can see a little subscribed label here, hovering over the local Tribune here as an example. That makes sense to me. I quite like the idea of that little label. I'm a bit old school when it comes to a lot of my stuff, my browsing, when it comes to things like YouTube and Instagram Reels and stuff. I do tend to value and focus on content from creators I am subscribed to. I am a person who checks my subscription feed, not just my homepage, and I don't let the algorithm do the work for me. So this is kind of a little bit of this. Again, it feels similar to Discover to me, in that we're kind of blending a social media style feed, a subscription based feed, in with the organic results of search that we've come to know over the last 25 years. Seems to be a bit of an evolution that Google are heading in the right direction for, in my opinion. Here's one for expert advice. So this is, as you can imagine, you probably have done this. There was the add Reddit onto the end of anything if you want actual human advice, because the Google results were always written by people who hadn't actually done anything. Again, this is tying into EEAT, right? This is the expertise. This is first-hand experience. You're getting advice from people who have done the thing, who have been to the place. They're giving you that real-life experience. So this is focusing, and basically AI responses, so AI overview and AI mode, will give you more previews from things like social media, from forums, and all that kind of stuff. And here's an example here. Of course, they highlight Reddit. Don't count your phone out for a good shot. The long exposure handheld on a phone is so good these days. They're literally giving forum-based discussion there. And they give a couple of other examples here as well, where it's discussing these kind of forums being highlighted, public spaces, social media feeds, all this kind of stuff being highlighted in search once again. What does that sound like? Sounds like Discover, right? Yeah, I know, right? On to number 4. See links right where you need them. I thought this was perhaps the most interesting of all of them. I'll read it word for word, this little section, and then we'll get into the details. To help you dig deeper into useful websites as you're reading, you'll now also see more links directly with AI responses, right next to the relevant text. For example, if you search for information about a California bike trip, you might see a series of bullet points about the route. With this update, you may now see a link to a Pacific Coast bike touring guide right next to the bullet point about terrain, or a link to a blog post with training suggestions next to the bullet point about daily mileage. So again, this is focusing on click-through rate, right? This is the way things are linked to in AI overviews and AI mode. This matters, in my opinion, matters quite significantly. The way these links are presented, where they are on the page, visually how they are presented. Do they include a favicon? Do they include extra, visual elements that encourage a click? Can make an absolutely huge difference. So instead of having the kind of breakdown, usually we would have it all on down the side there, right? It's like every single link all in one place in one long list. This is actually including more links within the responses themselves, directly next to the information that is pulled from that source. So here's an example we mentioned of the route here when you're talking about cycling. You can see the directions, the terrain, and the daily mileage there, and the specific sources that are linked to here for each part of those sections of the response, basically. I think that's interesting. I think that is a positive step, hopefully. If that is the bit that you're focused on, say if I am looking for this and I'm really worried about the terrain side of things, this actually encourages me to check out that specific source about that specific element of the answer to my question. So I think this could encourage clicks again. As always, take all this with a huge grain of salt. We say that, that should encourage clicks. Oh wow, Google are being nice to us once and encouraging people to click on things. They're still very, very sticky. They still very much want people and users to remain in this ecosystem and remain on Google. And last but not least, context for links. So this is about Google giving more context with basically a little preview when you hover over one of these links in AI responses. So here's the little hover. Here's about renewing your passport, which I need to do soon, by the way. There is a little hover here, and it pops up again. In theory, encouraging people to click through. In theory, this is positive. In theory, this is encouraging and definitely visually stands out far more than just a highlighted blue link there. The actual pop-up giving you the source, giving you the favicon, giving you that little logo there as well. Much more visually interesting, much more encouraging compared to just a plain old link. So I think these are all positive moves, broadly speaking, to encourage users to click through to websites and get direct expertise and advice and information from the people that are writing the content. I reserve the right, shall I say, to say, yeah, this is all absolute crap and this does not change the click-through rate at all. But in practice and in theory, this is encouraging and should improve things like click-through rate. Hopefully, maybe. We shall see. So yeah, those are 5 things, mostly talking about how links are presented in AI search, so AI mode and AI overviews when it comes to Google. Next up, let's talk about some local SEO stuff. And it ties in very nicely, a nice little segue there, from Reddit to more Reddit. This is, of course, the one and only Darren Shaw, who I had on the show a couple of years ago now, I think it was almost. Brilliant, brilliant person. Legit my favorite person to follow for local SEO advice and news. And Reddit is appearing in local searches, directly pulling threads into your Google business profile. So this is a search, of course. Darren himself is Canadian, so he's searching for bakeries in Edmonton. That's in Alberta in Canada. And in the About This Place section that arrives for this specific bakery, this is not on the SERP, this is on their GBP section, you can actually see Reddit threads being linked here. So you can see r/Edmonton being linked there. And this is a real kind of thing of, you need to be aware of what people are saying about your business online. They haven't even asked a question at this point, right? Often we'll see Reddit pop up if you ask a question of, should I buy this thing, or which one is better, or is this thing legit, and all this kind of thing. That's when things like discussion forums and threads and Reddit and all that kind of stuff appears. This is just a business profile with no questions being asked, but we have things like, what do you like about it? There's a news story thing about when that business launched being mentioned on the local subreddit. Local subreddits, if you're not already aware of them, you probably should be. And yeah, the tagline at the end here from Darren is, go get your business mentioned on Reddit ASAP. Yeah, some great advice here from Darren here as well. If this were my business, I'd make sure my voice is on every one of these threads. That is kind of what we've been saying for a little while now in general for search. But I think for local, this is even more relevant than ever before. If someone has a question, answer it. This is something I was saying a couple of years ago when it came to e-commerce. Specifically, creating informational content, doing FAQs, the value of that, having that post-purchase relationship and dynamic with your customers is hugely important. If someone recommends your business, thank them. I think this is a practice a lot of us in local SEO. I've done a bit of local SEO over the years. There's a lot of us already doing the, reply to your reviews on Google kind of thing. This is the equivalent of that on Reddit, right? If you see somebody say, oh yeah, I really recommend this bakery or whatever, you being in there to be like, thanks very much, mate, looking forward to see you next time, or anything like that, can make a huge difference. And start engaging on all of the subreddits that Google is referencing on your business profile and your competitors' business profile as well. So obviously this is an example pulling through a local subreddit. So this is the Edmonton. For example, we have the Norwich one here in Norwich. And there might be broader ones. There might be slightly different ones. There might be geo-specific and also industry-specific ones. If you don't know what kind of Reddit threads and subreddits are relevant to you and your business, especially if you're doing local stuff, now is the time to have a look. Now is the time to check what people are saying about you and your competitors in your area. Even if you're not local, this is still very, not working in local SEO, sorry. This is still hugely relevant information, and you should still be doing this sort of thing in general. Next up, let's move on back to some AI search. So this is optimizing your website for generative AI features in Google search. That sounds like it's been written by an SEO, by an agency or a consultant or an expert. It's by Google, which I think is really interesting. They occasionally do these little updates and do these guides for being featured in particular types of search. And I think for me, this is more of the same, for want of a better phrase. I will read this opening section because I think it kind of sets the stage for the rest of the guide and the article, and then we'll get into a bit of discussion. User preferences are rapidly evolving and people are increasingly gravitating to generative AI experiences to help them find information. Editorial from Jack here. Yeah, we know, Google. Like, you are forcing that upon us. Increasingly gravitating towards generative AI experiences. Yeah, because we can't turn off AIO or AI mode. Like, we don't have a choice. As we upgrade search to meet these changing expectations, this transformation offers new opportunities to reach people who may be more inclined to engage with your site, spend more time with your content, or even convert by becoming a subscriber or making a purchase. This guide is for website owners looking for official best practices from Google Search on how to succeed in generative AI features in Google Search, such as AI overviews and AI mode. Okay, so the big question all of us have been asking, is SEO still relevant for generative AI search? Google says, in short, yes. If you're a listener, if you're a viewer of this show, if you've paid attention to anything the vast majority of my guests have said, the vast majority of what Mark has been saying over the last years, or even people, Gary, John, Martin, the guys from Google that are having these kind of conversations, this shouldn't be a surprise to you. In short, yes. Best practices for SEO continue to be relevant because they are rooted fundamentally within the core search ranking and quality systems. This then also talks about RAG, also known as grounding. Mark did a brilliant talk about this from rags to riches, which is a brilliant topic that I will put a link in the show notes for, and this will basically get into a lot of the really interesting stuff for whether you need to be, which queries you need to be thinking about targeting, right? If something is being grounded or something is not being grounded, that tells you either there is a definitive answer, say for example, how tall is this celebrity, or where is this landmark, or whatever. That kind of thing is a known quantity and is just being sorted already. That's you're not going to rank for that kind of stuff. It's the other kinds of things where there is open to interpretation, there's comparisons, there's wiggle room, all that kind of stuff. That is where the meat and potatoes, the juicy bits of the search strategies lie when it comes to AI search. And that is exactly what they're mentioning here. Also, query fan out. Again, I will link to Mark's new tool talking about this, which is really, really cool. Goes into a lot of how AI search works, how it fundamentally breaks down the way it searches for information, the way it does deep searches and researching and all that kind of stuff. Google describes it here as a set of concurrent related queries generated by the model to request more information and fetch additional search results. Pretty much. And like I said, I'll put a link to Mark's latest blog post and the query fan out tool that he's built recently. This is a little interesting bit here. It's a little highlighted section, not a separate question, but a little highlighted little banner here. It says, what about AEO and GEO? Google answers AEO stands for Answer Engine Optimization and GEO stands for Generative Engine Optimization. These are both terms you may see used to describe work specifically focused on improving visibility for AI search experiences. From Google Search's perspective, optimizing for generative AI search is optimizing for the search experience, and thus is still SEO. I agree. We've been saying this for a while. We've been battling the GAO people and the AEO people and the AI SEO people, whatever they want to call it. It is still SEO. The fundamental, foundational SEO best practices still work. This is something I know we've been talking about a lot recently in the industry. I've seen this all over LinkedIn recently. The non-commodity content. Unique, valuable, and good. High quality, unique, and valuable. Providing a unique point of view, helpful, reliable, and people-first driven things. So this is an interesting, it was a bit of a controversial topic there. I saw a bit of back and forth on LinkedIn. I'll read this section. So this is on commodity versus non-commodity based content from Google, and I'll get into my opinions about it as well. Commodity content. Here's an example. 7 tips for first-time home buyers. Is often based on common knowledge, which could originate from anyone and typically adds little unique insight for readers. In contrast, non-commodity content such as why we waived the inspection and saved money, a look inside the sewer line, provides unique, expert, or experienced takes that go beyond common knowledge and the ordinary. For me, that is a lot more about how you're presenting that information rather than the actual content. Because I think you could basically write the same article, or, as I think they are hinting at here, as someone who writes a lot of YouTube titles, who consumes a lot of YouTube content and pays attention to things like YouTube descriptions, video titles, all that kind of stuff. They're YouTube descriptions, right? That's a YouTube video title. Why we waived the inspection and saved money, a look inside the sewer line. That's a video title. To me, this feels way more about how you are presenting that information, the way they're explaining it here. I understand that commodity and non-commodity basically is saying unique or non-unique, right? I hate this phrase of commodity versus non-commodity. Sometimes you want the consensus. Sometimes you want the information as a searcher. Do you want to be contributing to that as a creator, as a website owner? That's a different question. But they're saying they're prioritizing non-commodity content. I don't think that's always the right answer. I think sometimes there is a place for commodity content, for generalized common knowledge, broader discussions and stuff like that. Because I feel like people's opinions and expertise are almost inherently baked into their videos, their content, their blog articles, whatever it is. Organizing content in a way that helps our readers. Yeah, sure, obviously. People generally know how articles are structured these days. High quality images and video. Yes, we already know this stuff. Obviously, you want to support your content and stuff. Ironically enough, no images or anything on this page. So Google breaking their own guidelines there. But they've even got links for best practices and video, SEO, and all this kind of stuff. Focus on what the users want and avoid overdoing it. Obviously don't just generate rubbish and churn out rubbish and create separate content for basically everything. And this is a little kind of little slap of the wrist, I guess. If you're using generative AI tools to assist in content creation, be sure that your work meets the standards of the Search Essentials and our spam policies. Don't just churn out AI generated crap, basically. That's what Google's saying in a very, very much nicer way. And also we get into, so we're about halfway through, this is quite a long guide here. Interesting stuff about technical elements. The basics. Have your technical foundations covered. Have everything sorted when it comes to crawlability, indexability, how people are actually finding your website. Make sure it is human readability and not worry about text to HTML ratio and all that kind of stuff, right? I think there's a lot of element here where people get bogged down in, I need to really trim down. I was having a conversation with my partner the other day, and they were having a conversation with an agency they've been working with when it came to, I think it was image sizes. And they were like, they have to get under 200 kilobytes or whatever it was. And, when we were discussing it over dinner the other day, I was like, why? Where have you got this arbitrary number from? Do what works and do what's best. If it's better to have larger, higher quality images because your industry is visual, focus on that. It matters what we're doing here. You can't just apply that general rule. And I think that's what a lot of people get stuck in, is just I need to optimize this perfectly. JavaScript being another perfect example. If you're using JavaScript, be sure to follow JavaScript SEO best practices. Two people I always listen to when it comes to JavaScript, very much almost on polar opposite spectrum here. Of course, Martin Splitt from Google talking about this. Martin is brilliant and fantastic and does a lot of great general best practice stuff, basically, when it comes to JavaScript. And the other person who I mentioned in a previous episode, my Hive MCR recap, is John O'Alderson. Talk about how you don't need to use JavaScript all the time. You can just use CSS and HTML like a normal person. You do not have to put JavaScript in everything. Not everything has to be flashy and all, fancy and stuff like that. And then, of course, we get into local stuff. We get into e-commerce stuff. This is the fun bit, kind of what I've been building to. Myth busting for generative AI search. LLMs.txt. This has come up a couple of times. I even brought it up in one of the panels I hosted at IFMCR when we were talking about AI search. You do not need to create new machine-readable files, markdowns, anything like that. Just make sure your website is readable. It's simple as that. Stick with your sitemap, stick with your XML, stick with robots.txt, all the usual stuff. You do not need to do LLMs.txt. Despite the fact Google added LLMs.txt not only to their own website briefly, but also to the Lighthouse report. So they were the Core Web Vitals report that they do. They did add an LLMs.txt element to the agent readiness and AI search functions on there, the features on there. So, bit of mixed messaging, but in general, I fall in the LLMs.txt. You don't need it. Chill out. Just have a good, easily crawlable website. Maintain good structure. Maintain general technical health for your website, and you'll be fine. Chunking. I know, shout out to Morty, Morty Oberstein, who has been doing a chunking themed podcast recently. Of course, you probably know Morty from previous episodes of this podcast, from doing things like Surfs Up when he was working at Wix, and of course, the SEO Rant podcast, which he did for many, many years as well. Now, I think it's called Let's Chunk, or Let's Get Chunking, or something like that. This practice of let's make everything incredibly digestible and break everything down into little sections. I had this conversation with somebody at HiveMCR a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, that's just paragraphs. You're describing writing. Like, Google says here, there's no requirement to break your content into tiny pieces for AI to better understand it. The fact that people underestimate the power of Google, the power of these technologies to be able to read text, blows my mind. You do not need to be, doing a separate line after a line break after every separate line, just for readability's sake from a robot. Robots have been able to crawl and read entire huge pages of text for decades. You'll be fine. They also say don't rewrite stuff specifically for generative AI, of course. And of course, doing things like inauthentic mentions, which I thought was very funny, since, as always, there's a big discussion about digital PR and link building and brand mentions and all that kind of stuff. This is obviously tying very much into the rise in value of brand mentions, I'd say, when it came to digital PR and things like that. But don't just seeking out inauthentic stuff is considered a spam tactic, as I've said here. And the last one, which I think is perhaps the most controversial, apart from maybe the LLMs.txt, don't over-focus on structured data. Structured data isn't required for generative AI search. There's no special schema you need to add. However, it's a good idea to continue using it as part of your overall SEO strategy, because it helps being eligible for rich results on Google. And as conversations I've had with people like Jana van der Eel, people like David Ojeda, there's some great ways to make your information on your website more digestible by crawlers. Structured data and schema are those exact kind of things. And yeah, you should be doing this anyway, right? Don't just start introducing structured data because AI search is the thing. Speaking of AI search, we'll move on now. There's a couple of bits here about Agentic and stuff, but we'll get onto that later on. Let's talk about some GA4, shall we? Something we don't talk about a lot on this show. Something I will have Kyle Rushton McGregor to talk about on the show very, very soon. AI Assistant. I know, we usually see that word and are filled with fear, but actually this is a new default channel group in GA4 in your reports section. You can now go to reports and filter by source, by session source, medium, all that kind of stuff, and also just look at your default channel groupings in your reports and find AI Assistant. So the medium is AI-Assistant. You can find the channel grouping just called AI Assistant channel. And we were discussing this in the when we do our client reporting at the beginning of every month, it's the start of June. So me and my colleagues, Tom and Brendan, were talking about this. We do a lot of the reporting for our clients and stuff. And we were having this conversation. I was checking between using regex to filter LLM traffic, essentially, source OpenAI, source Gemini, all that kind of stuff, Copilot, etc., etc., etc. It's a fairly long piece of regex that Brendan had written. And then I compared that to just flick the AI Assistant default channel group button, basically, and comparing and contrasting. The numbers were quite different. And of course, not only that, there's no backdating for this data, as there never is with Google. So this is something to bear in mind if you are doing reporting. I would not wholly rely on this AI Assistant default channel grouping or the medium AI Assistant in your GA4, in your reporting. I found it was like a 60-70% difference in traffic, not a small amount at all, quite a significant change. And with the regex side of things, we were obviously filtering a lot of different options. And what Google says here, I think, is interesting. There's a keyword here I don't know if necessarily everybody's picking up on. The opening sentence is, Google Analytics now provides a dedicated way to measure and analyze traffic originating from popular AI assistants. They do not specify which services, which chatbots, all that kind of stuff are included here. Obviously, the vast majority of traffic comes from Gemini, comes from Claude, comes from OpenAI, ChatGPT, and Perplexity, probably, like the top main ones, the most used ones, right? But there was a huge difference when it came to the filtered, old school, as we called it, filtered version, and the new default channel group. So be very careful when you're using this. It's great that they're doing it, and we'll get on to some transparency from Google when it comes to this sort of stuff. At time of recording, they've just announced a sort of similar thing in Google Search Console for this kind of thing as well. And yeah, I'm hesitant to celebrate. I'm happy to experiment, happy to try it, but please do, like I say, bear in mind, it does not necessarily capture all of the traffic from all of the different sources, and it does not backdate any of your data. We had a bunch of like year-on-year comparisons, right, in our reporting. They all broke as soon as I flicked this button. As soon as I swapped the filtering around, it was like, yeah, that doesn't work anymore. All of your year-on-year reporting is broken. So yeah, bear that in mind. Don't get too excited or too carried away. As you can see, that's the 13th of May when this was announced. Like I said, I'll link everything in the show notes. What happened the following week, folks? Google I/O, the big one. And they launched a new era for AI search. This is on the 19th of May. It's a couple of biggies, couple of big ones. As often is the case when it comes to Google I/O, a lot of it is not hugely relevant to search. A lot of it, they obviously focus on their non-search AI stuff and a lot of tech things and all this kind of stuff. They were talking about, AR glasses and all this kind of thing. However, the intelligent AI-powered search box, they're claiming, and this is Google's wording, not mine, the biggest upgrade for the search box in over 25 years. Let's get into it. Of course, we already know AI mode is in the vast majority of your searches. You can flick over to the AI mode option. Here is the official wording from Google from the powerful AI right-in search section. Starting today, we're upgrading search with Gemini 3.5 Flash, yeah, whatever, as the new default model in AI mode for everyone globally. Because your curiosity doesn't always fit into keywords, we're also introducing, again, their phrase, the biggest upgrade to our search box in over 25 years, now completely reimagined with AI. This intelligent search box puts our most powerful AI tools right at your fingertips, making it easier to ask your questions. So, what that means, and there is a lovely little animation here on screen if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify. Basically, this is the closer towards the integration of AI mode to default search. This is borderline what I spoke to Arnout Hellmans and what I spoke to Steve Payne about last year. I think it was last year's I.O. In fact, I spoke to him around about that sort of time, where you're talking about the possibility of a filtering your search experience and diverging it based on your query. If it seems like you're better served by the traditional SERP, maybe we'll filter you through to the old traditional 10 blue links, right? Or is your query better served by an AI mode and an answer and a conversation? We will filter you through to AI mode so you can have a conversation. This is essentially what this is kind of doing. I will again go back to the words from Google here and I'll read this verbatim. It's more intuitive than ever, dynamically expanding the search box to give you space to describe exactly what you need. Designed to anticipate your intent, it also helps you formulate your question with AI-powered suggestions that go beyond just autocomplete. You can search across modalities using text, images, files, videos, or Chrome tabs as inputs, and you'll continue to get a range of results from search just like you do today. The new intelligent search box is starting to roll out today, so you already have this probably, in all countries and languages where AI mode is available. We're also making it even more simple to continue the conversation with search. You can easily ask a follow-up question right from an AI overview and flow into AI mode from an AI overview. Yeah, and there's an example of this here. This shows, you started with an AI overview, then you continue asking questions, it essentially pulls over and transforms into AI mode. This is pretty big, in my opinion. This is very much pushing users in the direction of using AI mode. This is very much pushing us as web users, as Google users, as searchers to using AI mode and relying on that more than ever before. I don't think it's a good thing. I'm glad it's not, completely taken over. I don't think I can quite tick off my prediction I made at the end of 2024, I think it was, when I said, oh yeah, totally, we'll see AI mode as the default search mode, search function by the end of 2026. I might have even said that at the end of 25, to be fair. This is heading in that direction though. It's definitely heading in that direction. This is very, very similar to what we were discussing earlier with a filtered search experience. We then get on to agentic stuff, of course. Talking about agentic side of things, talking about shopping, talking about all this kind of stuff. The information agents, as they're calling it, are now launching soon. I think in a couple of weeks, probably by the time you're hearing this in June, for Google AI Pro and Ultra subscribers. This is also expanding the agentic booking capabilities, so you can make reservation bookings and all that kind of stuff as well. And they're all rolling out this summer as well. Again, lovely little animations there by Google. Then some coding bits and pieces. They're integrating more anti-gravity stuff, creating apps and things like that. What's interesting, and this sounds like, oh yeah, agentic coding or whatever, that doesn't seem relevant. This is happening in the SERP. So this is hugely relevant. I purposefully skipped past this, that doesn't matter. It does. Again, I'll read directly. Search can build the ideal response in the right format for your question completely on the fly. So you can get custom generative UI, including visualizations and simulations tailored precisely to your needs. Whether you want to wrap your mind around astrophysics, hey, that's my degree, or visualize how your watch works, Search can design custom layouts, assemble components like interactive visuals, tables, graphs, and simulations in real time. This is mad. So this is a generative experience that is creating, we talked about this a little while ago, there were tables and charts and graphs and stuff like that. It was for sports data and finance. This is 15 levels higher than that. This is visualizations of physics things happening within search. And they use a how do black holes search here, and it gives you a visualization of how black holes work. So showing the gravity well of a black hole. wild. I think this is mad. So undoing everything we talked about in the first story, where Google was saying, yeah, totally, don't worry about it. We're giving them all the links and everybody's going to click through and everything's going to be, all of our links are so much more visual. Oh no, wait, we can just generate visuals and simulations and mini apps, it's how they describe them, in search. Custom dashboards, trackers, all kinds of stuff. You can come back to them in the future. So it's turning search into like a perpetual dashboard of stuff. It's absolutely wild. Last but not least, personal intelligence. Something we talked about quite a while ago, in fact. This is, again, huge news. Personalization of search, right? Finally, for AI to be most helpful, it shouldn't just know the world's information, it should understand your context too. So today we're expanding personal intelligence in AI mode to more people in nearly 200 countries and territories in 98 languages. No subscription required. You can now connect Gmail, Google Photos, and soon Google Calendar to your search, and it will personalize it with intelligent AI. So the example we've used, the example Google used, the one I always use in conversation is, if you have previously booked a vegan restaurant or have a history of booking vegan restaurants, chances are the next time you ask for food recommendations in a place, it's going to recommend vegan restaurants to you. It's learning about you. It's the personal intelligence that will personalize your searches to you. As a user, in theory, that's pretty cool. That's pretty handy, right? That's a one fewer step of friction. As SEOs who want to get data, this sounds like a bit of a nightmare, because this is going to personalize everyone's SERPs. So even if you search for the exact same phrase or the same term or whatever, which obviously we're already talking about when it comes to conversational search, people don't search the same thing that much as much anymore. As queries get longer and longer, the less likely they're going to be the same query word for word as everyone else, so you don't get the search volume. Even more personalized from the Gmail, from your calendar, from your photos. Are you interested in this? I'm intrigued. Let me know. I'll put a poll as well on Spotify, and I think I can do a poll on YouTube as well. Let me know, folks, if you are interested in personal intelligence for your search. Do you want your search personalized? As a user, I assume as an SEO, this doesn't sound fun. So as a user, are you interested? Do you trust connecting things like your calendar and your Gmail to search functions to allow this personalization? And we'll wrap things up. A couple of slightly quicker few things. Universal Cart is here. So this is part of the UCP, MCP type stuff that Google have been discussing. So this is an intelligent universal cart that is powered by Google Shopping Feed and the shopping graph and AI. And universal cart is a way of, you can add multiple things to your cart from different retailers, different websites. It can do price comparisons and it can be personalized. So you can see here, you can add things to your cart while you're browsing search, chatting with Gemini, watching Google, or even reading your Gmail. The moment you add a product to your cart, it gets to work in the background, finding deals and price drops, giving you insights on price history, etc., etc., etc. When you're ready to buy, UCP makes checkout from your cart super smooth. You can check out with Google Pay. Again, another integration with this Google ecosystem. This is what we need to talk about. Google's ecosystem is everywhere. If you're using Gmail, you're using Google Maps, you're using Google Pay. It's all integrated together. It's all smushing together. YouTube, all this kind of stuff. They also talk about the partners here. So you can try these select features soon across merchants like Nike, Sephora, Target, Ulta Beauty, never heard of them, Walmart, Wayfair, Shopify, etc. This is launching in the US, coming very, very soon. So the US in search and Gemini apps this summer, with YouTube and Gmail to follow shortly afterwards. And it gives some examples and some visualizations here of what it will look like. So like before you check out, hey, you've got a loyalty card, don't forget to do this and all this kind of thing. A little shopping assistant that happens in the search, in the cart feature itself. Again, in theory, very cool. I am a big multitasker. As someone with ADHD, I tend to be doing 2 or 3 things at a time anyway. I will be watching a YouTube video and doing something else, or listening to a podcast, or answering an email, and also posting on social media, whatever it is. All this kind of stuff. In theory, I'm kind of for this. I don't like the consolidation of everything necessarily, but in theory, this could be a positive step. And last but not least, we had our lovely little May 2026 core update. Very, very quickly. This began rolling out on the 21st of May and finished on the 2nd of June. Nice and easy, right? This was relatively quiet from what I remember people saying. And then let me just get this other link up actually, because I know Systrix did some analysis on this. Let me get the, here we go. This is a breakdown here. Let me drag this across to my other window. Hello, welcome back. So this is, of course, Steve Payne at Systrix doing a little analysis here. Let's get straight to the data, shall we? Talking about some pretty big movements here. And yeah, be aware, basically. Pay attention to what is going on and what is happening in your visibility, because I know a lot of stuff has been discussed recently. We're having this conversation again when it came to client reporting the other day of like, when do you mention core updates? When do you mention, could this be related to core updates? Attributing all this kind of stuff is very difficult, but including it in the conversation is very easy to do. So ensure, if you are having these conversations, include them with your client, reporting, with your conversations, with your colleagues and your peers and all that kind of stuff. Started on the 21st of May, finished on the 2nd of June. If you have been affected by that, it could be something to keep an eye out on your reports. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully you enjoyed that 45-minute breakdown of all the Google I/O and important news that happened in May 2026. Of course, I'll be back next week with more great conversations, more guests, more summaries and discussions about SEO. And in the meantime, please do, like I said at the top of the show, like and subscribe and follow us and all that kind of stuff. If you haven't already, go and check out Search Norwich XL at searchnorwich.org if you want to go and get your tickets for our conference that's coming up in September. Coreupdates.com is the place to go for all of our newsletter stuff. If you want stuff like this, basically a news summary every single Monday that will give you all of the important news, all of Mark's LinkedIn SEO tips and all that other fun stuff, go to coreupdates.com and you subscribe there. In the meantime, have a lovely week. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you next week.